The other pernicious thing we have to watch out for about our disasters, disturbances, and so on is the uneven distribution of vulnerabilities. It's often said that climate change is not gender neutral, doesn't care about national boundaries, and so on. And yet, even within a city itself, a natural extreme event, let's say like a heat wave, doesn't affect everybody the same way. And this is also true for things like waterborne diseases, diarrheal diseases that we talked about in terms of the number of deaths. So this is a good example, the silent discriminate killer. So it's indiscriminate if it kills everybody, but if it's discriminate, basically it's going to pick and choose based on various socioeconomic factors. So that's how things get complicated. In mid-July 1995, Chicago experienced a week of record high temperatures that would write itself into history as a major disaster and a revealer of inequalities in urban America. Of course, the biggest one then came in 2003, I think, in Europe, which killed over 75,000 people. So when rich countries get shocked by such events, they realize that they are not as invincible as they assume to climate events. Kleinberg states in his landmark study of this terrible event that heat waves are slow and silent in invisible killers whose direct impact on health is difficult to determine. This is very important because people keep talking about how heat wave mortality will increase in the future, but attribution of deaths to heat waves is very, very difficult because it's often, manifest as cardiovascular, cardiac arrest, respiratory disease, and so on and so forth. However, the event caused over 600 excess deaths and 3,300 excess emergency healthcare visits only in Chicago, and people suffering and dying were not in any way from all walks of life. Most of the casualties were poor and elderly living in the city center without air conditioning or means to have it on, refraining from opening their windows or from being outside during dark hours due to fear of crime. So you can see how human factors, socioeconomic factors begin to play into it. No AC or worried about electricity bills to turn on the AC, no caretakers, elderly people without care, and of course early warnings and so on can help, but not unless somebody is there at the last mile to translate that warning into actions for protecting elderly and the vulnerable. Elderly men were worse affected than elderly women due to the generally greater social networks of latter group. African Americans were worse affected than Caucasians, while Hispanics were less affected than both other groups, further indicating that not only poverty mattered but also social inclusion, as the Hispanics at that time lived in areas with higher social cohesion. Statistically, only 26% of the deaths would have happened in the near future regardless of the heat wave, clearly indicating that many lives would have been possible to be saved with more attention focused on the problem. So early warning system is just a start. Translating those warnings into action is really the last mile problem. That's often a social problem, an extension worker problem, and social network problem, social cohesion problem, and so on. And this is still playing out, that India has gotten much better at early warnings, but sometimes people are exposed to heat waves without paying attention to the early warning, or the early warning is not accurate enough for a specific location, and so on. Okay, so earthquakes are the biggest killers. I think volcanoes come in second, and then we get into climate events. So earthquakes 1970 to 2011 from these are the Richter scales here, which is a log scale, so obviously you have tremendous difference between 6.1 and 7, or 7 and 8, and so on and so forth. And the scale is, it's not too clear here, but there are dots here, and of course these are the plate boundaries where the potential for earthquakes are high, and Japan is dotted with enormous number of earthquakes, and this entire ring of fire on the Pacific plate in general is full, and this mid-Atlantic ridge as well, and there are some hotspots here. Indian Ocean has one or two hotspots. The 2004 earthquake was massive. I think it was somewhere in the order of 9, if I remember, in terms of the Richter scale, and the land sank by about 30 meters, which can set off massive tsunami waves, which it did, and killed hundreds of thousands of people and so on. Okay, so volcanoes, eruptions from 1980 to 2010. We worry a lot about volcanic impacts on global warming, which is again a tunnel vision on global warming, but they are also mostly unpredictable hazards, even though now Iceland is sitting and watching a volcano keep on creating seismic signals and slowly emitting, but if it explodes then it's going to be a problem, and so on. So you can see the ring of fire shows up again, and here are again the plate boundaries and so on where volcanoes have occurred. There are some sprinkling here as well, and here in the Aleutian chains and Central America, South America as well. So plate boundaries colliding here and so on, subducting, colliding, etc. And what can we say about this? This obviously sometimes is predicted. Historically, there is the year without summer here from I think 1896. There are some massive events that have occurred over Indonesia, so this is always a hotspot as well. What do people die from? Just in terms of causes of death globally in 2019 from Our World in Data, which is a great site, the size of the entire visualization represents the total number of deaths in 2019, 55 million. Each rectangle within is proportional to the share of deaths due to a particular cause. These are also kind of something that have details in them that let's say heart diseases are related to pollution. Pollution is often higher in poor neighborhoods, even in a rich country like California, because power plants are put in poor neighborhoods, sanitation plants, water treatment plants, water treatment plants are put in poor neighborhoods, and so on and so forth. Cancer similarly potentially has relation to pollution and so on. So we'll come back and look at climate impact on health in a minute, but chronic respiratory diseases, digestive diseases, diabetes, neurological, other non-communicable, and here you have infectious diseases, pneumonia, diarrheal, tuberculosis, HIV, AIDS, malaria, neonatal deaths, maternal deaths, nutritional deficiencies, transport accidents, and suicides and homicides. There is some argument now that suicides are also related to climate change. Homicides, increased temperatures are argued to make people more violent. Diarrheal diseases and so on, obviously related to climate and human activities as a whole, and so on and so forth. So 74% died from non-communicable diseases, 14% died from infectious diseases. These are numbers to keep in mind because less than 1% died due to interpersonal violence. So depending on which problem you want to solve, you can say sustainable development solves many problems, but a tunnel vision on global warming target may ignore the details on where most people are dying. So they are not directly climate related. So it is advantageous in many ways to focus on sustainable development as the biggest challenge rather than, I mean, it's not independent of global warming targets, but messages do matter. From the 1970s we went into global warming as opposed to pollution, and now it has cost us because pollution continues to kill a lot of people directly and indirectly, but we are focused so much on global warming, not even local warming in its totality, and so on. So that's a bit of my preaching. So we'll come back and look at maybe a few more details on how deaths have occurred. So this is almost 10 minutes, but maybe let me leave this for the next podcast because there are some nice details here in terms of causes, leading causes of death globally, and then you can split it into low income, middle income, upper middle, and rich countries to see how people die and how these numbers have changed over time from 2000 to 2019. Again, it's a combination of human activities, climate change. When we say human activities, we mean urbanization, land use, agriculture, food production, and the dominant fossil fuel consumption, greenhouse gas increase, warming, extreme events, and so on. So we'll come back and discuss more. Okay, let me see. When I close quickly and then turn around, I leave a little gap in the end, which should be avoided like this.